research plan. A research plan is really important because it's kind of like a framework for what your research is supposed to be like, and it gives you almost a procedure, a very broad stepping stone as to how you're going to go about conducting your project. So the first step is going to be the rationale and introduction, and I'll go over all of these in more depth later. The second is going to be the hypothesis and your expected outcome, your engineering goal. Third will be your background in research and other types of research that you need to do for your project. Fourth will be your materials and methods. And then fifth, coming off of that vein, is the main preliminary procedures that you're going to get from those materials and methods. And sixth is safety regulations and forms, and that's more of the grunt work, but it needs to be done. And seven is going to be your references. So I'm going to start off with the rationale and introduction. The rationale is really important. It's why you're doing this research, you're identifying the problem, and you're kind of giving us insight to your solution. So when you think about all the research you're doing, you need to mark what is the most important part of your research. We like to say that you need to sum up your research in three main words. For example, if your research is conducting towards Alzheimer's research, you need to explain that the current diagnosis for Alzheimer's is limiting, that it's very expensive, and that there's a lot of room for improvement there. You need to look at where in the current solution that your project is aiming to improve, what's the caveat. So the rationale and introduction is supposed to briefly mention your solution, and whilst doing that, it's supposed to introduce why the problem is so necessary to fix and how your solution can fix it. So the rationale is going to be the backbone of not only your research binder, your logbook, but also all of the presentations you're doing. So making a good rationale is extremely important in ensuring that the idea gets across to the judge very quickly. What's similar to a rationale introduction that we'll talk about later is your abstract. These are both things that are going to be giving a judge a very basic overview of your project, but in this, they should get the main premise of why they should care. That's the most important thing. Why should I care about your research? The next is the hypothesis and engineering goal. Some projects won't have hypothesis and some won't have engineering goal. It depends on what kind of project you have. So starting off with scientific, these are any of the life science categories like medicine, chemistry, translational medicine, biochemistry, stuff like that, in which you're not physically building something, but you're conducting research and doing repeated trials and stuff that's very indicative of lab research. It doesn't have to be the lab. For a scientific hypothesis, you need what's called an if-then statement. This is a very basic thing, and most of you have probably already used an if-then statement, but it should clearly state your variables and what you're collecting. So in an if-then statement about which type of plant or which type of water makes plants grow the highest, you need to explain the different types of waters and which one you think will increase the centimeters or the growth of the plant the most. That goes over the different types of independent variables and the dependent variables. Hypothesis is really important when it comes to conveying to a judge that you followed what's called the scientific method. And in this, you're showing to a judge that you know how to conduct research. It's more of a technical thing. In engineering, you have what's called an expected outcome or an engineering goal. An engineering goal is kind of similar to your rationale in your introduction. You're kind of outlining or bulleting why or the criteria for your design that makes your project important. So if I'm creating a robot that can automatically harvest plants, I should have criteria that it should be able to harvest these kind of plants within this sort of time frame and with this sort of accuracy. So the engineering goal is going to be very broad, but it's going to have specific details as to what it's trying to do. The engineering goal is very different from the scientific hypothesis. And if you mix these up in your project, it's not a good thing. So we'll help you move through as to which one you need and how to craft a good one. Background research is really important. The first step should technically be research. You should be researching what your idea is going to be. Most of you have probably already done that. But you also need research in the middle phase of your project, right before you begin execution. Background research allows you to understand topics, terms, methodology, anything important you need for the rest of your project. So this kind of information right here is going to be really important for when you're conducting your project. So the more background research you do, the more effective it's going to be during the execution part of your project, the less hiccups you're going to reach, and the faster that process is going to go.
And to add on to what he said, even though, like, let's say you do a continuation project into the next year, the background research is still key, like, because you need to know what you did last year and build off of what you did last year, because you can't just repeat the same project. As for me, like, this is my 4th year doing my project, and I still have to conduct, like, many, like, I still have to do a lot of background research, even though it's the 4th year, so you like think that, oh, so I know what I'm talking about already, but I still have to go through other steps in order to improve, and that's basically what science fair is, improving on other people's ideas and other ideas to make more effective world and real world problems.
And then these are some of the things that you should do background research on. Terms just means anything that might come up in your presentation, your binders, your logbooks, you need to be extremely familiar with it. So any kind of difficult terms or vocabulary that will be used heavily throughout your project, you need to know it like the back of your hand. The second is advanced methodology. So if your research needs something like mass spectroscopy or it needs advanced object tracking or something like that, then you need to understand how that works so that you can convey to a judge exactly how it works in pertaining to your project. Understanding the methodology to your project proves that you've done this research truly. Third is dangerous materials. And what's important to note here is you need to understand the safety issues and if you can actually use those kind of materials in your research. Different types of safety regulations can be a pass or fail for some kind of science fair projects, especially up at the higher levels. There's this thing called the Scientific Review Committee. And if you haven't done your research for understanding what's safe and what's not, and what's not allowed and what is, then you can get disqualified at a high level fair.
And this is jumping ahead a bit to judging, but the reason why background research is important is because let's say you have a speech all prepared, you can't go outside of that bubble. That's going to really harm you, and it's going to show the judge that you don't know what you're talking about. So having this background knowledge and a breadth on what's going on in the world and about your topic will help to improve your speech so that you don't just stay in a circle that's your speech. Because you want to be fluid with your speech, because when a judge comes and asks you a question, you don't want to just be standing there because you've only prepared one thing.
And that's really important. People think research should be done before you start, but it should really be done during your entirety of your project. Because when you're doing your research, you're solidifying and expanding your knowledge on the topic. And then the last one is potential issues, and that kind of goes off of dangerous materials, but it's anything that might pose a danger or might pose an issue towards your research. If it stops it, or if you need to find a new way around it, doing background research around it might help find a new way. And then the next step is materials and methods. This is going to be the biggest part. This is going to be understanding what you need to do and what you need to do. Starting with materials, you need to, in your research plan, evaluate every single type of material you need. If you need a paper towel, you need to put that on there. Because what this material and method should be able to do later on is somebody should be able to exactly replicate your research. That may sound a little bit weird, but what it shows is that you've gone through in documenting the steps in order to create an effective procedure that any scientist or peer reviewer can follow. So you need to evaluate all types of material and equipment. So equipment could be the stuff you use at the lab, or even softwares online, open source data sets, stuff like that that might not be something that you buy in a store or build yourself. And then also what's important is you need to figure out the prices in vendors. So you want to make sure that your project is within a reasonable price. So if you are trying to build a nuclear generator and you find out that it's $7,000 to build, that might be something that you want to go in the other direction in. Because generally speaking, science fair should be a low-cost type thing. It's not always like that, but because you're student researchers, you need to have a lower budget. So if one of your materials is $1,000, then you need to look at alternative materials in order to ensure that your project, your overall system is low cost and feasible. And then also you need to understand the vendors. So special things like chemicals, biological agents, RNA, DNA, anything that requires one of those safety forms is probably going to have to be bought from a special place. Examples are Carolina Biologicals sells a lot of different type of biological agents, and there's a lot of different chemical companies that sell more dangerous chemicals that may be needed for more advanced projects. So in order to get those materials in time and effectively, you need to start researching where you can get every single material right now. And then for our methods, this is kind of going off of the materials. These two are really intertwined. So what you need to first do is find out the kind of methodology you need. In background research, I talked about the advanced methods that you need to research, and this is going off of the same vein. You need to understand the basic or advanced methods that you need throughout your project. If you need to do object tracking, research object tracking and its principles in order to understand how you can apply it to different parts of your project. For example, here we have two different types of methods that might be in a project: molecular docking and object tracking, and then there's also something statistical analysis. These are very broad topics, but understanding as much as you can on those topics will make it easier for judging and doing your project in the execution phase. And then also, you need to make sure that these methods, along with the materials, are feasible and inexpensive. If you're trying to create, like before, the nuclear generator, you need to make sure that's not the most insane thing to do. Some projects can seem simple at first, but when you dive into them, the methodology is so advanced that you only make this much of progress in this much of time. So you need to make sure that these methods are feasible, and then going off the same tangent, inexpensive in order to be done on within the certain time frame that you have. So these are procedures, and this is the preliminary procedure that I was talking about. It's very similar to the methods, but what a procedure is it's that step-by-step process, a numbered step-by-step process that allows a peer reviewer, an audience, a judge to see exactly how you've gone through your research. I know you haven't done your research yet, so it might be hard to create a step-by-step procedure, but you need to make this as detailed as you can right now. This will change. In fact, most of this will change, including the materials, the rationale, the hypothesis even. But you need to understand that this is really important for when you have judging coming around. And it's a very important documentation tool. We talk about research plan mainly as being in the binder, and it's going to be a very, there's going to be a very designated place for the research plan in the binder. But it's also going to be, these kind of ideas are going to be in your logbook, and they have to be in your logbook. The second thing is it needs to be very detailed. So what I mean by a person should be able to replicate this exactly is if you have very specific procedures, you need to mirror that exactly throughout your research plan. This will allow anybody and everybody to kind of replicate your research, or at least go along with how you've done your research. And then also, you want to make sure that even though it should be very detailed, you need to make sure that there's not high-level terminology or anything that might confuse an audience in there, because that can just get frustrating. So like I said before, you need to know terms in order to convey your message more clearly during judging and throughout your literature. You can use that same thing in your procedures. You can momentarily define something and then use that term as something in your step-by-step procedure. This will make sure that anybody can follow it. And then it's also really helpful to split different sections. So if you have an engineering project and you have a coding phase, you have a hardware phase, and you have a testing phase, you can split that into 3 separate procedures. And you can do this in your research plan, your logbook, your binder, and really helpful is your board, so that people can look at separate sections and digest that information more clearly. So this is kind of the grunt work part of the science fair. It's something that's very necessary because if you don't have some of these things, then it can cause a lot of anger and frustration and sadness on the day of the fair. So the first things at the top, these are all different types of forms, are things that most people need. 1A is a student checklist, and by the way, all of these are going to be done through Scienteer. So if you're at PISD, you're probably familiar with Scienteer. It's what your teacher has probably signed you up with. And if you're not and you're registering independently, you're still going to need a Scienteer account. And if you have any trouble with that, you can ask any of us. But Scienteer is kind of the hub for where you put your research plan, your abstract, your forms, so that every fair you go to knows that you're a part of that fair and you're up to regulation. So these forms you can do through Scienteer. The first is the 1A, which is the student checklist. This is just like the title of your research and the purpose and very minor stuff like that. 1B is approval, and that comes from a sponsor, which means everybody will need some sort of sponsor, whether it's your teacher or if you're registering as an independent, you need to find someone. And also you need parental approval. And then 1C is for a research setting. If you're doing something in a lab or a very dedicated research setting like a clinic, then you need to sign off by that clinic. Otherwise, your research will not be considered as, the research that was conducted at that place will not be considered as valid at the day of the fair. And then these are more specific forms. Not everybody are going to have these, but I'll still go through them just in case the research you have in mind has something like this. These forms are going to make things a little bit more complicated and a little bit more work. So if you do have any of these things, just feel free to ask this question. The first is number 2, which is a qualified scientist. You might need this with 1C. If you're working with a scientist, you need this form. Number 3 is risk assessment. If you have anything dangerous, that includes a knife, that includes anything that might cause any kind of harm, you have to put it down. Because if they find something that might cause harm on the day of the fair, they can make you get a last-minute form, and that's a really hard thing to do 20 minutes before the competition. Number 4 is human participants. This is going to be mainly just for a behavioral project, but human participants are one of the most annoying things in science fair. It's rewarding, but it's annoying. You need a human participant form that goes over the risks that are being posed to these human participants, and then you need a sample-informed consent form from every single participant and or guardian that is with that participant. So if you have human participants, you're going to have a lot of forms. It'll be probably number 4, number 3, number 2, 1C, 1B, 1A. But yeah. 5 and 6 is biological agents, so stuff like RNA, different types of microorganisms. And 7 is if you're doing a continuation of research.
All right, so the scientific method. So there's actually 2 kinds of methods. There's the scientific and engineering. So the first thing to do is you probably all have like a knowledge of what you want to do, and then so that will establish whether you're doing the scientific method or the engineering method. So the first method is the scientific method. Now, you first want to find questions about problems occurring in the world, and once you find these problems occurring in the world, find one that you're actually really interested in, because you're going to be doing this project for a while. So like, you don't want to do something that you're not interested in just to win. Like, I say this like all the time, but like, just like trying to cure cancer to win isn't going to make you win. Like, that's not how it works. You have to find something that you're interested in and then continue to pursue that over and over. And so once you find this problem, you want to question it. Ask many questions about it until you find something really specific that you enjoy about it. And then see what people have done to solve that issue. And then find out how can you improve on that, on what someone else has done. Or you can go off on your own branch and do something else and new and innovative and create your own idea. So for my project at least, so I was in plant sciences and I was finding different shells that I could put in soils to promote plant growth and water retention. And I simply found that out just because when I started it 4 years ago, Plano was experiencing an extreme drought. And that's how my project all originated. So then you experiment with it. And so experimentation is hard but also fun. So you want to make sure that you're getting the right data. Like, you don't want to be experimenting on one thing, although you have your hypothesis testing another thing. Your hypothesis, like he said, is an if-then statement. So you want to make sure that you're actually testing that if-then statement. Once you get your results, you want to do statistical analysis on it, which is what Olay was talking about earlier. To get this statistical analysis, you might perform like a t-test or something, or whatever your project might be about, and that statistical analysis will help you to form a new equation. This, not equation, question. this new question is what you can use for next year's if you enjoy what you're doing. If not, then you're going to want to find another idea and go through this whole process again. And that's just to find your idea. So if you do happen to create a new question that you want to continue over and over, then you'll be able to further test your ideas in the years to come and then communicate it with others and judges. And don't have like I said before, like a circular speech. You want to have a fluid speech where you can talk to a judge, or I can talk to her about my project and she can ask me any questions.
And then treat this list kind of like a checklist. This is going to be everything you do throughout your project, excluding the presentation phase. And also, when we said statistical analysis, not all projects will have a so-called statistical analysis, but you will need to boil down your results and discuss your results in a manner that's very fluidly communicated throughout your judges.
Alright, so the other method is the engineering method. So this will be anything that's not exactly life, so physical. So so it starts out the same way with like finding a problem that's in the world that you're actually interested about, because you don't want to do something for years that you're really not interested in just to win. So then you want to, again, find out solutions that already exist and build upon that, because when it comes down to it, that's actually what science is, building off other ideas to better the world that we live in. So once you find out this engineering goal per se, which is what other people have done and how you want to build upon it, then make your own prototype. And this will be something that's not already done, but building off what someone has already done. And again, you want to, same way as the scientific method, analyze what you have done. And like I said, it might not be exactly statistical analysis, but it will be some sort of analysis that you'll be able to explain to the judges to say why exactly is your project important in the world we live in today. And and once you find all the tests and everything, again, if you want to continue your project, you enjoy what you did, then again, just find a new equation or question, and you can do the entire process again, like you said, as a checklist, because you want to complete all these things to be able to better your project as well as be able to better your presentation. Because if you do all these steps, you'll really actually have a breath on your project, so communication with the judges will be very easy, and you won't have to stay in that circle. You'll be able to talk to someone easily about your project.
And I get a hand of like a show of hands as to how many people are in life versus life, or think they're in life, life sciences, and then how many people are in engineering? Okay, so most in engineering. These are going to be completely two separate things in the fair. Even like major awards like the grand prizes will be one for life and one for engineering. So you need to make sure that you follow your particular method. If you have an engineering project, follow your engineering method. And if you have a life science project, follow the scientific method. And then from going back a little bit, if you have a life, get a hypothesis. But if you have an engineering, get an engineering goal. Make sure that you adhere strictly to your track, life or physical, engineering or scientific, because it's going to be really important as to how you convey and show yourself to a judge.
Okay, so once you started with your research plan and you have like a project in mind, you can just get started on preliminary testing. So first, you will want to split your project into several parts or sections and tackle each part separately. So this way, you break down this really complex experimentation into smaller, more manageable parts. So, for example, if you have an experiment with multiple phases, you can work on the first phase, then the second, then the third, for example. Or if you have an engineering project, iterations are always encouraged, and judges really like to see that you've built upon your first prototype, that you've done something to change or improve the efficiency or the accuracy, or just done something to make your prototype better. So that can also work in this, like splitting your project up and then working on the different sections. So to get started with experimentation, first go off of what you wrote on your research plan. So in your research plan, there will be a detailed procedure, and just get started trying to follow that procedure. And along the way, you'll probably run into problems, or you'll run into things that didn't work out the way that you expected, and that's totally okay. That's like a really big part of science fair, and for all of our projects, we will run into problems such as that. So when that happens, make changes to your procedure. So when something doesn't work, just write that down, document it in your notebook, and then also write down what you actually did instead to solve that problem. And that will become part of your final procedure for when you are presenting your project. And I mentioned iterations. So for engineering projects in particular, proof of concepts are a really good way to get started on your project. So if you have an idea, but you're not exactly sure some of the technical aspects of how to actually construct a prototype or how to actually build what you want to build, creating these small tests or proof of concepts are a really good way to try and test out your ideas really quickly, and it will help you to get started with the engineering process. So proof of concepts are basically really small and simple mock-ups or prototypes. You can do this for parts of your final prototype or for other sections that you want to test. And usually they're made out of like really simple materials that you can find everywhere. You can find like in your daily life. Like for example, if you wanted to prototype a robotic hand that's driven by motors, first you can test out if the finger mechanism that you want to use works by using a cardboard mock-up. Like in that picture, the person just used cardboard, straws, and string, which basically you can find just about anywhere to test out their idea or concept. So after they find out that this concept works or their proof of concept is actually valid, then you can move on to the more complex prototype using like motors, wires, 3D printing, or more complex and I guess fancy methods. That way, by using proof of concepts, you're able to test your ideas really quickly and also save time and resources. So you don't have to go out and like build this really complex thing just to find out that it doesn't work in the end.
Is there Joyce Wong in here? Joyce?
Oh, and then also, like she said, proof of concept is really important. Even for scientific, if you're creating some kind of method that is helping, say for example, plants, then that's a proof of concept. Even your final iteration, refer to it as a proof of concept, because you're still going to make a final one after that. It's going to continue to get better. So proof of concept is like my favorite word, because it ensures that you're making sure, it ensures to a judge that you're not done with it.
Yeah, and as Olay mentioned, this works for just about any type of project. It's most commonly found in engineering projects. However, if you have like a CS project, for example, this proof of concept can count as testing out parts of your code to see if it will work or not. And for scientific projects, they can be running a small experiment to see if your whole setup will work. And for engineering projects, as I mentioned before, judges really like to see iterations where you've improved upon your prototype or your product, and this is a really good way to showcase that to the judge. So when you're presenting your project, you can put up some of your proof of concepts as iteration 1, iteration 2, leading up to your final prototype that achieved the best results for you.
Okay, which one is the light that's not as bright? Okay, well, this one we don't really need. So I'm going to talk about good research practices now. So science fair, it's really important to be as thorough as possible, because if you miss out on one sort of... You good?
Yeah, we'll just leave it as is.
Okay, we'll just leave it as is.
Yeah.
So if you miss out on something or you aren't very thorough, that can look really bad to a judge if there's another competitor with a much stronger and much more thorough planning. So the first element of planning is the logbook. So I use this as an example. Yeah, so a logbook is just like a regular composition notebook, or you can buy logbooks online that are fancier, but it's really not necessary. So you can use this composition notebook is where you should start with every single process, with every single step of the process that we've mentioned before. Whenever you think of something new, write it down in that logbook and try to add as much as you can. there's something called logbook entries, where it's like sort of a journal. You write what you did today, what you added, and how that impacted your project. And that's really beneficial because that shows the judge that you actually care. Because I can tell you right now, a lot of people competing, they don't care as much to like keep up with their logbook. And judges actually go through that and they flip through it to see like whether or not like your parents did this project or whether or not you actually did this project and you were influential in this process. The next part is the research binder. Typically in research binders, someone who's less experienced or someone who isn't as thorough with their project, it's just like a simple 1-inch binder with like 5 pieces of paper in there. That's not what we want in a thorough research binder. Sometimes people have 2 to 3 research binders like this thick each, and then so because they're so thick because they're really thorough. Every single part of their procedure is outlined in specific steps that makes it easily replicable to any judge that's reading through the project. Every hypothesis and every design that you've implemented, pictures are in that book, and the judge will be able to see that you took care to take these steps. And another thing that you add in the research binder is actual research that you conducted. So if you find a scientific journal online that's sort of similar to your project, a really neat trick that you can do is you print out that research report, you highlight and annotate it and add it to your logbook or add it to your research binder. That way your research binder gets a lot thicker and it shows to the judge that you know what you're talking about. So if you see people with like really thick binders, that's usually because they added all those citations in there.
And as Charles mentioned, your logbook will probably be your best friend throughout the research process. So everything that you do, whether it's researching online or actually conducting your experiments, you will want to write that down in your logbook. So keep entries on every single day that you actually work on your project and just write down everything in it. And if you do collect your data online, you might want to jot down a note in your journal that you collected data and it was documented on a Word document or like an Excel spreadsheet, so you don't have to handwrite all of your data within your logbook, but just make a note of it.
Yeah. And then let's have a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you're on the drive to the regional fair, and you realize that you haven't done that much work in your logbook. Don't panic. What a lot of people do, and I guess this is kind of cheating, but if you want to add to your logbook, you can add entries like just right before the fair. I know a lot of people who do that. And then so it's not like super recommended, but you want to like have as much time to add as many entries as you can.
Yeah, it's not recommended to do your logbook last minute. As I said, it's really good to write stuff down as you're doing it because you'll remember it better, it will be more specific and detailed, and also it will just save you a lot of work last minute when you're trying to panic and remember your presentation and work on your board and stuff like that. Another note is that for your research notebook, you can always add pages in or add like sticky notes, index cards, basically anywhere that you wrote down stuff for your research. Even if you didn't have your logbook with you that day, if you wrote it down on another sheet of paper or just jotted some things down in a sticky note, you can definitely add that into your logbook and have that as a page.
Alright. So continuing on to experimentation, we've already talked a little bit about experimentation, but another thing that we want to add is you want to do as many trials as possible. So let's say you have this computational testing and you get one set of results every single time you run that test. If you only run that test one time, then there's a problem because data can usually be very variable, which means that it can be really high sometimes, really low, and the standard deviation can change all the time. So what you want to do is you do multiple trials and even out that like deviation that occurs within your data. That'll make your results more accurate and precise, and like the overall project will be more successful. And the second part is record any data that comes up. So let's say the project that you're working on, let's say you're doing a molecular docking project to see how well a protein attaches to a molecule. You don't want to only look for one specific set of data, like how strong that bond is. You can also look for a variety of different data, like molecular weight or dipole-dipole interactions. It's just jargon. But if you can record all of those things, then you can observe side trends. And if you can show those side trends to your judge, that can be really, really interesting and show your depth of knowledge. Because when the judge is questioning you, and let's say you don't know one specific aspect, having that depth of knowledge is going to be really, really beneficial. So don't only focus on one specific, variable, because that can make your project like less detailed. And take pictures. When you're doing your experiments, don't just like record the data and move on. every single step of the process you should have like a camera and be taking pictures. You don't want to include your face because that's against the rules, but like if you're like designing something, take pictures of every design like we showed in that hand thing before. And let's say you're doing a reaction, like a chemical reaction. Take pictures before the reaction, during the reaction, and after the reaction. These pictures are going to be incredibly valuable because you can like add that to your research binder, add that to your board, and then that's going to be more engaging to the judge than just a bunch of words like I have on here. And then also make observations in your logbook. Don't only record down the data. You can have quantitative and qualitative data. If you've been in like science class, you'll know the difference. But basically qualitative data is like observations, like color, size. Color, size isn't. But like in color, what's going on and what things that you've noticed as interesting. So that way you'll be more knowledgeable, and overall that just contributes to the depth of your project. The more in-depth your project is, the more likely it is to impress a judge, and then the more likely it is to be successful. Alright, and so finally collaboration. In the science fair process, something really frustrating is how toxic and how reserved people are with their projects. So if you try to like ask someone about their project, they're like, no, I'm not telling you anything. And that can get really annoying, but what we want to recommend is like not being that way. When people ask you about your project, you don't have to hide everything. Just like talk about what you're doing, but you don't have to like go in detail. So that way people are generally good people. So if you tell them about your project, and if they're like experienced in the scientific field community, then they can like actually make recommendations and help you with your project. And you should do that as well. It's like a good competitor in science fair. And another thing is that's going to do is it's going to build up a solid reputation among the science fair community. Like if you're someone that's really, really kind to everyone and supports everyone's research, that's going to be really helpful, and that's going to help you be better liked. So once you go into the competition, you'll be nicer and friendlier, and that'll come off to the judge better. I specifically know at my school last year there was a group of people that was like really, really toxic and said bad things about other people's projects. And we don't want that here at AYSI and throughout the rest of like your life in scientific research as well. Also, collaboration with us specifically, or other mentors that you might have reached out to. Don't be afraid to like ask questions about specific nuanced stuff that you might not know a lot about. Because not knowing things is often really difficult, and if you go online, you often like look towards like research journals. But these research journals are really, really complex, and they're like hundreds of pages long. And it's going to be really hard to like decode that information and utilize it for your project. So feel free to ask us questions, and if there's like a high barriers to entry for going into the specific scientific field, that's why we've hired like experienced mentors to specifically talk to you about that element of science. Do you guys have anything else?
Yeah, and on that, if you don't have any questions right now, or if you think of a question in between our meetings, feel free to ask it on our message board. That's a resource for all of you guys. We all have access to it. The mentors also have access to it. So if you ask a question on here, one of us will respond and give you an answer to that as soon as possible.
And another element towards collaboration is when you're practicing, be sure to practice with like everyone you can. Practice with your parents and have them be able to ask questions about your project, and be sure you can answer those questions. Maybe like you have like your parents' co-workers that you can talk to. Try to like present your project to a variety of different people to get as much information and knowledge as you can. Collaboration is fundamental when you're doing any sort of research, peer review, and all that type of stuff. And you want to keep all of that in mind. Alright, so where is John? Okay, so while we wait for John, I'm going to go ahead and talk about TJAS, or the Texas Junior Academy of Sciences. I think this year the applications are due pretty soon, but the Texas Junior Academy of Sciences is a science fair held at Texas A&M, and it's like a PowerPoint keynote-based, I'm doing it? That's perfect.
Oh, do you want me to do it?
No, I can do it. Okay, so like I said, TJAS is like a PowerPoint-based based competition. So it's going to be set in a room like this at the Texas A&M Student Center. And there's going to be rooms like this where they have a projector and like four judges in each room. And there's going to be spectators in the audience as well. So you have this PowerPoint, but there's more to that. So first you have a proposal and a paper that you submit initially. It's like an application. They accept, like, I don't know the percentage that they accept, but they accept a certain amount of people, and they accept you based on how well you wrote your research paper and how like intriguing and how critical your scientific research is. You want to make sure that this research paper is really, really good and has no typos, because So when I did this thing last year, my judges wrote on my critiques that I liked your research report because there were very few typos, which implies to me that some people who applied had a lot of typos, and they actually read through your research paper to get like a basic understanding of what you're talking about. So that's like really important. A trick that I used was I downloaded Grammarly. I'm not sponsored, by the way.
Are you sure?
But yes, I'm poor. So I downloaded Grammarly, and there's like a ton of mistakes that I made. I forgot commas in like 20 places, and then so that was a really helpful thing to add. What is after this? Okay, so this is a critique that I think John took a picture of. So this is the judge's comment sheet. They judge on presentation, your written portion, like the research paper that I mentioned before, and like your overall project. Something that I noticed at TJAS was that it was kind of delivery based. It was how well you could convey your project and how well you could answer those specific questions. Like when I was doing TJAS, I used, there's a lot of noise outside. Can you close the doors? Okay, so when I was doing TJAS, my project wasn't like the most highest level of complexion project. And there was a couple people in my round that, in my opinion, had way more complex projects than me. They went to like UNT and had their lab tests done with like 5 different scientists, and that like really intimidated me, right? But then when they went into the competition, they were like talking really quietly, and I didn't understand the research, things like this. And then the judges can't hear what you're saying, and when you're answering questions, it's like, it's not as engaging, and some of them even like fell asleep. So you don't want that to happen. So this is very highly delivery based, and delivering your research in an engaging way is the #1 thing that you're going to have to keep in mind at these sorts of TJAS fairs. But another thing is having, what are the other slides? Okay, this is the last slide. But another thing you want to do is make sure that your PowerPoint is really thorough, but also really engaging. In the PowerPoint, if you do this competition in the future, be sure to keep in mind most of the PowerPoint should be pictures or charts or graphs or like graphics that you can make on like free softwares. What that's going to do is if you have a bunch of text, like I had in my other slides, the judges are going to be like kind of not as engaged. It's going to be a lot less interesting, and they're going to be really bored of your project. And including pictures, including graphs and charts is going to be really helpful in delivering your research to the best of your ability. And in TJAS, you also submit an abstract. Did we talk about abstracts today?
Don't believe so.
Okay, well an abstract, we'll go into more of that later, but an abstract is like a 250-word summary of your project. And having that abstract in your written portion is also really critical because it shows you like how well and how thought out and how clear the goal of your project is. So,
and a little bit more on the format of TJAS. So TJAS uses a PowerPoint presentation format as opposed to a standing board. And so you will get 12 minutes to present your research, followed by a, I believe, 6-minute question period where the judges are able to ask you questions about your project. And at TJAS, usually the questions are pretty hard, especially if you get into the finals round. So if you are competing, we will help you get ready for that. And I believe we're holding a meeting specifically on people who, specifically for people who are interested in competing for TJAS. So if you're interested, we will be sending out more information in the near future.
Registration starts in about 1 week or so sometime this week.
Can you clarify the prerequisite? Do they have to be 8? What grade?
Oh, TJAS is for senior competition only. So if you're in high school, then you're able to compete in TJAS. Middle schoolers, I'm sorry, wait until you're in high school.
but the thing is, I use my middle school project for TJAS. So you want to like, if you're in middle school, keep that in mind. Do your middle school project to the best of your ability, and you may be able to get to a national level competition with a middle school project. That's pretty cool in my opinion.
Yeah, and since this competition is pretty early in the year for science fair, usually people use their projects from last year. So in Charles's case, if you are in 9th grade, you can use your 8th grade project in TJAS competition.
Yeah, and then we're about to end the seminar.
Yeah, just one more thing. How many people already have projects that they're ready for TJAS? I'm just wondering. And if anyone is interested in participating. 1, 2. Alright, cool. How many people have projects that are already complete, more or less? Especially the experimentation part.
Like from like last year maybe?
Yeah, okay. So if you guys are interested, We'll be sending out information for a TJS mentoring session, which will cover basically everything that they talked about. We'll help you design your PowerPoints, and we'll also barrage you with questions. And that's going to be good practice. So if you guys are interested, please just stay on the lookout for that.
Okay, also before you guys leave, is there a Channing Leong here? Spelled Q-A, sorry,
No,
Q-R.
they're not here.
What about an Ellen Sun? Oh wait, never mind, she's already checked. What about a Joyce Wong? A Joyce. What about a Kevin Zhu and Kara Zhu?
No, they raised it.
Oh, okay. I'll just recheck you in here.
Okay, so while John's doing that, if you are a C member, here's how everything's going to work. So before the seminar, you should have dropped off all of your stuff at your designated location, and the mentors have been looking through all of the things. So what you want to do now is go back to your station, so to speak, and then we'll have 15-minute increments in which our mentors come talk to you. So they've been reviewing your contents, they'll have things to talk to you about, and you guys will be talking about how you can get started on your research, and then where to go from there.